Australia is very concerned about the far right, and has been for a while.
What do we want? No more! When do we want it? Now!
There is an increasingly militant far right in Australia.
Australia's top intelligence official has spoken exclusively to Sky News about shocking scenes of right-wing extremist groups.
And in the wake of anti-mandate, anti-lockdown and anti-vaccine protests that have swept the nation in the past 3 years, that concern has only grown. We hear about isolated acts of violence and large-scale protests, but who is the political vanguard of Australia's far right? Well, I'm sure one name in particular comes to mind.
I and most Australians want our immigration policy radically reviewed and that of multiculturalism abolished.
I'm quite happy to remove this because this is not what should belong in this parliament. With you, I'm Indigenous.
She's Indigenous?
Yes, I am. Do you know the word Indigenous?
Yeah, I do.
It's native to the land. I was born here. Where's my land if it's not Australia?
England?
The biggest problem facing Aboriginal Australians today is their own lack of commitment and responsibility to helping themselves.
That's right, Pauline Hanson, leader of the far-right One Nation Party, the woman who has done more to bring the far right into Australia's political mainstream than anyone else in recent memory. However, even more extreme figures have arisen from the party. Splits from One Nation include Fraser Anning, who famously claimed that the Christchurch shooting was the fault of Muslim immigrants. And the Great Australia Party, a party so conspiratorial that Pete Evans is running for Senate on their ticket.
Do we have the belief in ourselves that we are contagious, that we are spreaders of something? You know, I choose not to believe in that narrative because it doesn't make any sense to me.
But what I wanted to do in this video was explore the current evolutionary stage of the far right in anticipation for this upcoming federal election. To do this, I spoke to Kevin Hargraves, the One Nation candidate for Macpherson, and Joshua Berrigan, the United Australia Party candidate for the same electorate, to clarify their positions on certain issues. When I asked both of them about what prompted them to get into politics, their responses were telling as to the current stage of far-right activism.
Everything that's been happening over the last 2 years, I've been following pretty closely because of how much it's impacted us, it's impacted everyone.
Yeah.
And I was getting more and more despondent because the government mandates, the government's response wasn't easing. It was just progressively going further and further, getting worse and worse, the control. I saw this online event and I heard people like Malcolm Roberts and George Christensen and a bunch of different independent media share, and that was the first time I heard Craig Kelly speak, and that gave me some hope.
I had no inclination to get into politics ever until the last 2 years or more, 2.5 years. I just realised that things are running this country like they're supposed to be. It's supposed to be a democracy. We're losing our democratic rights, we're losing our human rights, and I thought, wow, we've just got to stand up to this and try and change things and turn it around.
When asked about the biggest issues of the election, Mr. Hargraves' response was the following.
I think the three biggest issues is one, the mandates, how it's divided our community, how so many thousands of people, tens of thousands of people actually have lost their jobs through mandates, which is totally not right because at the end of the day, if you are vaccinated, you can still get COVID, so why do the ones that weren't vaccinated have to give up work? So that's, to me, that's, democratic rights just walked out the door.
It seems that the driving force behind the far right at the moment is COVID-19 related issues. And it isn't just these two candidates, the marketing for their parties reflects this as well. The UAP's slogan is freedom, 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 and the primary drive behind their current leader Craig Kelly's exit from the Liberal Party was over the issue of vaccines. One Nation has also seen a rebrand recently, whereas in 2019 you could find their About page railing against political correctness, it now talks about rights and freedoms. In 2019, you could find a 496-word policy breakdown on the issue of refugees, which specifically endorses boat turnbacks to Indonesia and a travel ban on so-called extremist countries. And if you wanted them to make the dog whistle more specific, they also have a further 881 words on radical Islamic violence, which endorses this same policy. However, if you visit their website today, you will find no such mention of Islam, and their refugee policy is only 67 words long that only implies the support of turnbacks. Sure, their immigration page talks about only allowing migrants from so-called culturally cohesive countries, but I'm really not sure about how many people are aware of this policy, and that is including One Nation candidate Kevin Hargraves. The One Nation website states that migrants would only be allowed from there's an exact quote, culturally cohesive countries. Can you just explain what that means for me?
What they want is people who are here to fill the void of things we don't have. It might be doctors, it might be chiropractors, it might be whatever. So people who can come here and be productive in this country, because that's what we want. That's the sort of immigrants we want. Do you not agree?
Yeah, definitely, I agree with that. I'm just so that isn't necessarily locationally specific, is it not?
No, not locationally specific.
Yes, that is the claim, that the word country is not locationally specific. Even when I try to bring up the issue of the party's past racism, it is deflected and then somehow brought back to the mandates.
You know, they try to purport Pauline Hanson as racist. She's not racist at all. She'd be the most, I don't know what the word I want. She'd be the most compatible person with other races that you'll ever see. She's no more racist than I am, and I'm not racist. My partner's Asian. I like to guarantee you that One Nation is not racist in any way whatsoever.
Yeah.
In fact, the media painted Pauline really racist way back when she went in dressed in Parliament and she went in to say that, you know, it doesn't matter what race you are, you should have the same rights as Australia. But they twisted it around and turned it around like they do.
So do you stand by the when Pauline Hanson went into Parliament dressed in a burqa?
She did it to show people. It wasn't she did it to denigrate that. She did it to show people it didn't matter whether that was your background or your race. Australians should assimilate with everybody. It's about being together. It's about, you know, under mandates, we've divided our community so much it's bad. Now, we're not about that. It's about assimilating people and having a community that fits in with everybody. So it doesn't matter what race you are.
This is how thorough the rebranding from a mainly anti-immigration party to a mainly anti-restriction party has been, and there's political impetus for this. The anti-restriction and anti-vax movement has been one of the largest the right has seen in recent memory. And One Nation has never come close to the electoral highs they enjoyed in 1998 and 2001, even after Pauline Hanson rejoined the party in 2013 after over 10 years away. It makes sense to jump on the new thing. However, there is a problem with this, and I'm not just talking about how it's been proven that the COVID-19 vaccine is safe and effective. Also politically speaking. According to Australian government statistics, 95.59% of Australian over 16s have received 2 doses of the COVID-19 vaccine. That's only 900,000 people who aren't vaccinated, a portion of whom haven't even reached the voting age. While the anti-vax crowd has certainly been loud, enough to power the resurgence of the UAP and prompt the rebranding of One Nation, it's nowhere near large enough to achieve any kind of actual legislative power, especially when considering how thin their vote is spread across the nation. When I raised this with Mr. Berrigan, he said the following.
In my experience over the last 18 months, and I'm trying not to exaggerate here, but I would conservatively say that 9 out of 10 people that I speak to that have been vaccinated chosen to be vaccinated because they thought that was the best option to protect themselves.
This isn't true, of course, but this does mean that the parties have to have another selling point. The first is boilerplate economic nationalism. This is a position held to some extent by people all over the political spectrum, and I'm not going to interrogate it too deeply. Firstly, because it isn't very interesting or unique to these parties, and secondly, because it decidedly takes a back seat to the mandate issue and also economic populism, or at least the appearance of it. It isn't the sort of economic populism that, say, the Greens would advocate for, i.e. wealth redistribution and progressive taxation to fund social programs. The major issue that the UAP and One Nation have in common when it comes to this is the national debt. The UAP add on to this, proposing a 3% cap on home loan interest rates. Now, this clip is a bit long, but I promise you it is worth it. If a bank, say, needs a 4%, because they raise an interest rate to like 4% if they to maintain profitability. So if for example they needed a 4% interest rate to maintain profitability, but it was capped at 3%, then they would stop. They would just stop giving out mortgages. However, I know Craig Kelly has offered a solution for this. I've done a bit of research. So Craig Kelly clarified this by saying that the government could issue treasury bonds, which would then subsidise the banks, maintain profitability, and also keep the interest rates capped.
Yeah.
Now my issue with this is that so I just did a bit of maths, bit of like research. So the average mortgage now stands at $600,000, which is crazy. Sure. So obviously there's a big issue here among 6 million mortgages. So if the government had to subsidise just 1 year of payments on those mortgages, it would at what usually would be a 4% interest, so subsidising 1% of that interest rate, that would involve issuing $24 billion worth of treasury bonds, which would then be, after, depending on whether they're issued at 0.1% or 0.2%, plus anywhere from $500 million to $1 billion of interest. And I know that Clive Palmer has speculated about a 6% interest rate, which would then be $60 billion of treasury bonds in 1 year. And treasury bonds would eventually have to be paid back. So I'm just wondering, for clarification, how are we going to be lowering the national debt when we're issuing treasury bonds that could amount to $24 billion added to the national debt every year, plus interest?
Sure. Good stuff. So, a couple of important things. Firstly, repaying the debt is a whole nother strategy. Now, we will repay the debt by putting the 15% tariff on countries that import our iron ore, right?
Yeah, I've heard about that. Yeah.
Yes, and I think it is we provide, I think it's over 70% of the iron ore to the Asian countries.
Yeah, it's $117 billion worth of the in value exporters of iron ore. Yeah.
So by putting the 15% tariff on the iron ore for those countries, within 20 years we'll be able to pay off the $1 trillion debt. The current repayment plan of the current Liberal government is to pay it off in over 150 years.
Yeah.
150 years. So that's that's going to cause inflation to continue to rise and the interest rates to continue to rise.
So so the iron ore tax levy is considerable. Like I believe it's it's $117 billion exported yearly. 15% of that is around $17.5 billion, which is a lot of money. However, I'm still having trouble reconciling the 24 billion in treasury bonds that could be issued in a year if banks need to maintain profitability at 4% interest. So, like, that's still a difference of what, $7.5 billion, or $6.5 billion. Like, are there other taxes that come into this? Other redirection of funds that?
No, so Brandon, the reality is, I'm not in the detail of the financial plan.
Yeah, that's kind of incoherent. And also, it isn't great when one of your federal candidates can't explain the second most important party issue. In my opinion, these gestures at economic populism are as shallow as the anti-vax talking points, in that they are both driven by whatever is the current thing. As seen with One Nation, refugees or Islamic terrorism are no longer a huge thing, and so they can be dropped, while rights and freedoms are now top of the agenda. The platform is incredibly malleable to fit whatever the current wave of the anti-establishment extreme right-wing is. And Australia should watch out for this, because it isn't always going to be as innocuous as an incomprehensible interest rate cap, or anti-vaccine rhetoric in a country that's 95% vaccinated. Back when Pauline Hanson was talking about Islamic extremism and wearing a burqa in Parliament to demonstrate why they should be banned, real acts of violence were being carried out against the Muslim community. Right now, in America, laws are being signed stripping human rights away from women and inciting hate against LGBTQ+ people and POC, all over culture war issues. And when we have a media monopoly owned by the same guy as Fox News, and the hosts are acting buddy-buddy with Pauline Hanson over a cartoon that peddled election fraud claims, maybe it's something that we should just be a little concerned about. At the very least, it probably means we shouldn't have had her on our morning shows countless times. Anyway, that's all from me. Vote